What's going on, everybody? Welcome to episode 92 of Beards of Tech. I know it's been quite some time since episode 91, but the world is in a different place.
A little bit.
Both in just my life and Urban's life and in the world itself. But, you know, that's neither here nor there. But yeah, it's, I guess, like, just for some clarification around why our last episode was in October and why this is now just happening is one, in November, I purchased a home, and also in November, Jeff got married. Congratulations again, Jeff. And as it turns out, when both of those things happen at the same time to 2/5 of the podcast, it's really hard to keep traditions going at that point. The life and landscape changes just a little bit.
Yeah, life got in the way a little bit, which happens. We all get busy sometimes, and we decided that we're going to take a little bit of a break from the episodes, but hopefully we'll be back on a more regularly scheduled basis from now on.
Mm-hmm. Unlike last time, we have a plan.
Yes, we have a plan. It'll be audio only for now. We'll figure out the video soon.
Yeah.
And we'll be posting those all over Twitch and YouTube and all that. But for now, we'll focus on the video portion of it. But happy to get back on the road. And there's plenty of stuff to talk about that's going on right now in terms of
As it
tech.
turns out, audio is a relatively important component of podcasts. So at least we're able to deliver that.
Yes. Although we did have some trouble getting started because, you know, you get a little bit out of the groove and stuff. And you're like, how do I do this again? It's like trying to learn how to ride a bike again.
My microphone was a little nervous, so I had some jitters before we got started. But
need a little warm up. Warm up those coils or whatever. I don't know how microphones work.
I had to brush the cobwebs off the microphone to get it going again. But yeah, no, it's weird. There's a lot to talk about, despite the fact that not a lot is happening in terms of tech, mostly because of this coronavirus that has everybody sheltering in place. But as it turns out, sheltering in place for a podcast that's been 100% remote is actually the perfect element we need to get going again. So that works perfectly. But yeah, no, I think it's cool to talk about just a bunch of random stuff that's happening in our lives and some news that we might have. But first off, just the elephant in the room, coronavirus. The one thing that I've noticed is that there's been an abundance of communication between family and friends and people who work with each other through electronic means as a way to get around the fact that we can't interact socially in person. And I think that kind of presents an interesting topic that we could discuss, which is how technology is keeping people together during this global pandemic. I think if this had happened even a decade ago, the situation would be far worse than it is today, just because these video conferencing tools and this technology hasn't had a chance to develop yet. Or at least become nearly what it is today.
Yeah,
now it's easy.
It's so easy, right? It's built into your phones. If you have an iPhone, you already FaceTime. Now you're just FaceTiming more often than usual. Depending on who you are, you have all these services out there that you can use to video chat across platform as well. So, you know, you it's so ubiquitous nowadays. And like I was used to just doing it with my grandma, not with friends. But now I'm video chatting with friends. And actually, you know, talk about like us between us, you and Matt, like we never really we're good friends and we hang out and we talk and chat and text all the time. But during this time, like you've just become like a regular person that calls me on the phone and has a 30-minute conversation while you take your dog on a walk.
Yeah.
And, you know, that sort of, you know, changed our behavior. And I think it's kind of brought us closer as friends.
I think so.
Because we really never did that.
Yeah.
Before that. It's kind of interesting how it changes the behavior and kind of actually brings people closer together that you were close with before, but not like at that level.
Yeah, because like not everybody is fully up to speed, I guess is a good way to word that, on like the video chat software. No, it's not easy to just be like, hey, send me a duo call, or like, hey,
Yeah.
FaceTime me, or like, hey, do this. It's not as easy as it is to call somebody, and everybody's used to the procedure of a phone call, and like they can have a conversation and do other things. And I thought it was a great opportunity to in a way catch up with people, or like check in on them, or just like make it a point to talk more to people who I normally only see in person.
Yeah.
And I think it's had a really positive effect on me mentally, just because I'm able to like keep a pulse on friendships, and be able to like find out what my friends are doing, and like you and me, we have these conversations on a nearly daily basis.
Yeah.
And I'll rotate between basically you, my dad, and another friend of mine who's closer, and then there's some other people who I'll try on lesser frequently occasions, um, but it's nice to like kind of have that routine still, where you can still interact with somebody on a regular basis. And I think both of us can speak to that. Like you were saying, it's made us closer as friends. I agree. And I think it's been like super nice to just be able to keep up in a way where we normally couldn't. Because if like I was saying, if like during the Spanish flu, this wasn't possible. During if this had happened, like I said, even a decade ago, this would have just been phone calls. It wouldn't have been like Zoom calls, or Jitsi calls, or Skype calls, or like Discord chats, or whatever. It would have just been like at most like Ventrilo and phone calls.
Yeah.
So yeah, we're in this like really interesting situation with technology, where it's not making this feel like as much of a global pandemic as it would have been in other times, but for the people who aren't immediately impacted by coronavirus, it's kind of given us this interesting window, or interesting opportunity to reconnect with people.
Yeah, certainly. And it makes it a whole lot easier to keep that connection going. Although I did find I like, physically hanging out with people. I still do miss that. So it's not equivalent. There's still
Right.
some part of it that's missing. And also I've read a couple articles, mainly from professors, who do lectures, and they're used to doing classes in person with students, that doing it via Zoom or whatever technology that their university might be using, they feel more exhausted, more drained at the end of the day. It's not as satisfying, not as gratifying as doing a lecture or a class in person.
Hmm.
So it's not equivalent. It certainly helps, and it's great that we have this technology that we can continue on with certain activities, regardless of if people are in person or not. But it's certainly not a replacement for
No.
actual human interaction.
Yeah. No.
And
People definitely need to
humans
keep in touch.
through evolution have been evolved have evolved based on having close interactions with a small group of people. That tribe mentality.
We're social
And
creatures.
yeah, very very social creatures, and I've seen certainly an effect on me, from a mental sense, and sort of not doing that often. Work calls have also, I've been more keen to turn on the camera for work calls, just because
Yeah.
where I typically would never do that previously,
Hmm.
during any work calls. But it just feels good to physically see someone, or
Yeah.
virtually see in this case, or have that interaction. Makes it more interesting.
Yeah. And I would have never done that in like normal calls, and like I would make it a point to like disable my webcam on my laptop, because like during those work situations I always talk to people, and I was always interacting with people socially. Like your desk is like within feet of somebody else, and it's like, and well within social distance for sure.
Yeah.
But like at that point, like you're right, in these situations there's some kind of a craving for actual interaction with people, and the closest we can get to that, the better for us. Like turning on webcams so people can see each other, and kind of like adds that human element to the call, so you're not just talking to a headless voice like in on the internet or something like that.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I mean, like, don't get me wrong, I kind of like, just the nature of my personality and how I am, I'm like low key thriving in this situation right now. Like I'm really enjoying like all the me time that I'm able to get. But yeah, there definitely is that social element that's not there that I'm used to. Like I like going to bars with friends or going out to dinner with my fiance and like enjoying a meal, or like even just like going to a store and just being in a place with people who are doing the same thing as me, even if I'm not directly interacting with them. Just seeing another person in person is like enough. Because like I even like, if I go to a grocery store, like I find myself making like stupid small talk to people 6 feet from me, like just conversations. And, like I was joking with some lady while I was walking my dog, and she was like, "Oh, how you doing?" And I was like, "Oh, I'm doing good." Like it's like these walks are becoming more for me than they are for my dog at this point. so, so like I totally get that. There's a need for interaction with people, and like I find myself fortunate because I'm in a suburban neighborhood where there's like the second that the workday is over or like it's nice outside, there's just people on their front lawns like lounging on yard chairs, and you smell like the fires in the backyards and all that stuff. And it's like it gives me that sense of a community and there's people, so it kind of fills that void. But yeah, there's no substitute for getting drunk with friends and hanging out.
No, certainly is not. But although virtual happy hours have helped,
they have.
They're fun and they're fun. We make it fun with games and stuff, and they're pretty great. So yeah, it's definitely easier to handle it nowadays than I think it would have been a couple
even just from
years ago.
Even just from an employment perspective, like if this happened 10 years ago, there would have been almost no jobs that could have handled remote.
Yeah, the infrastructure wasn't there to support that.
I think back then all you really had was AWS, like Azure and these other services didn't exist yet. So like I don't think Azure is 10 years old. So I can't back that up. I'm sure you're probably looking into that, but
yeah. But yeah, it certainly enables companies to be more based on the cloud and not based on local infrastructure, and having a VPN to always connect to stuff. And as like jobs over the years have become more remote and mobile and allowed to, or companies are even more flexible to allow that. It also depends on the company, right? There's certain ones who flat out refuse to do any remote work, and now they're kind of forced to. So this might also change the behavior of any future.
Yeah, we didn't have
companies,
a work from home policy.
Yeah, for companies in the future of having a policy, because like actually we can actually support it. So if you want to work at home, I personally wouldn't do it because I never liked it. I had that option. I liked going into an office physically. I never, I once, maybe twice a week I would do it. But, but for some people, they prefer that, they have their lives, they have kids they take to, school or whatever, and you have to manage those schedules, and that's just easier when you're home. So I understand their viewpoint and
some people are full-time remote. So
yeah.
This is just no change to the routine whatsoever.
I work with people who are full-time remote, and they're like, "How's it been for you?" I'm like, it hasn't changed. I still do the same thing. Yeah. They're like the only effect that I see is when I go to the grocery store.
Yeah. It's just slightly more awkward to go out shopping. That's all.
Yeah, that's the only change that they see. But this might change, I think, the behaviors of certain and the mentalities of certain companies who have been sort of refusing to adopt a flexible work from home policy. Yeah. This certainly might push them towards getting it more common within the workplace. I'm very
interested in the landscape of the work environment in a traditional office setting. I'm very interested in seeing like what this impact is on that kind of a thing. Yeah. So, yeah, for sure. But I know there was a couple other things you wanted to get into also.
So it's all semi-related to what we've been talking about. I think we should bring up one video chatting service that overnight, it seems, because of this pandemic, became widely used and popular, and the name sort of just spread like wildfire, perhaps faster than the coronavirus itself.
Yeah, and shockingly to me, it's not Skype, because I would have thought for sure that Skype was like just the ubiquitous
Yeah,
free chat client that everybody uses, but it's
yeah.
not.
It's not. So the Zoom has become quite popular across all types of industries, as well as not just work or school, but also personal use as well.
Hmm.
In what seems like overnight,
Yeah.
in popularity. Like, I've certainly known of them. I've heard their praises on how easy it is to use. Certain companies who I work with and have conversations with use Zoom a lot, and they praise it every time that I went to do presentations there for my daily job. But I was well aware of them, and I actually, I understood what they were trying to do, and I've heard their name bounced around, and they recently just went public on the market, I think exactly a year
Okay.
ago.
That explains why
Um,
I haven't heard much about them.
yeah. So they were private and sort of like a startup.
Okay.
But recently became big enough to go to the public market. But I think the reason for it becoming so popular is just the ease of use. So they really focused on um, having really very little barrier to entry, right? You
Yeah.
send your link, it's fairly straightforward. If you don't have the app locally downloaded, it quickly downloads it and just logs you, like it just starts the conference.
Hmm.
And the reason I bring that up is some of these concerns that were around its security is kind of related to that, right? So
Yeah.
to make it as easy as possible for people to join, all these, typical audio conferencing issues that people have, double audios,
Hmm.
echoes in the room, like all
Yep.
of that. Zoom tried to make it as easy as possible for anyone to just hop on a call and make it sound good and make the experience great. And by doing that, they had to sort of work around some of the security, make it as seamless as possible, because more security, less convenience, less security, more convenience. So you have to balance some of
Yeah.
the things, and I think Zoom went to more convenience route rather than the security. And now that the popularity has increased exponentially due to this pandemic, I think those security issues that sort of they were kind of um, glossed over a little bit
Yeah.
just to make it more convenient to use or easy to use, which also in turn gave it all this popularity. I think sort of now are in light all these security concerns, and more people are actually looking at its behavior, what it's doing more closely. All these security researchers, and actually they're highlighting a couple of things in terms of the security concerns, and credit where credit's due. I think Zoom has been quite open in terms
Hmm.
of like acknowledging, yes, we know,
Yeah, I've been
and
impressed.
and they've actually done like a feature freeze where they said we're not going to do any more new features. We're really focusing and putting all of our developers on fixing bugs
Hmm.
or issues or fixing certain vulnerabilities that have been highlighted by the security community. I think as of recently, April 26th, which is actually today.
Yeah.
They're scheduled to release the brand new version of their desktop client, I think 5.0, that is meant to roll out a whole bunch of these fixes within its program that they have been criticized for.
Make no mistake either. If you like put basically any chat client under a microscope, you're going to find a lot
Yes.
of problems.
Yeah.
Like, this is just because Zoom has security
Yeah.
issues doesn't necessarily mean that other places are like immune to this. Like, Skype is by no means a perfect chat client.
Yeah. Yeah, certainly. So if you put any piece of software under this big of a microscope and you're analyzing every little thing that they're doing, yes, you're going to find flaws
As a
in a
software
wide range.
developer,
Yes.
I can agree 100%. There's a lot
Yeah.
of what
Yeah.
we refer to as spaghetti code out there, which is just patchwork code applied on top of patchwork code because, quote unquote, it works, not necessarily because it's good.
Yeah. And I think, you know, due to its popularity, the tension has been disproportional for sure, for Zoom. But like I said, they're doing what they need to do. They're looking closer, looking at the encryption, looking at all these bug features, addressing the Zoom bombing issues of, you know, randomly, you know, finding random Zoom calls by, you know, what was it called? Not war dialing, but Zoom. What
I don't
they
know
call
that.
it?
I've never heard of that term.
Z war dialing.
War dialing.
Yeah, war dialing. So that's a classic like hacker term where we're randomly trying to guess. Originally, it was for guessing phone numbers, right? So you create a program that would generate guess a phone number. This was back in the modem days.
Yeah,
so you wanted to connect to a random modem. It could be some, you know, whatever modem outside that was listening for a call to connect to it. So you just set up a script on your computer that would just try every number overnight, and in the morning when you wake up, it will give you a list. Here's all the successful connections that we made overnight, and then you can see exactly what those numbers led to.
Yeah.
So people created the same thing for Zoom calls because they're randomly generated IDs, and they're fairly easy to guess. You can write a script fairly quickly to go through and try and join random generated IDs. And by default, back to that convenience thing with Zoom, by default, Zoom meetings then have a password to join. Right?
I like this Z war dial tool that I'm looking at.
Yeah, that's the one.
It's like, warning, joining a Zoom meeting you are not invited to is not nice. Press enter if you agree to be nice. So it just goes into a ton of... This is crazy, dude.
Yeah.
I didn't even know about this.
Yeah, so by default, you didn't have a password to join a meeting. Again, back to that convenience thing, right?
Yeah.
So you want to make it as convenient as possible. It's like, you click a link. It's like, oh, what's the password? It's like, oh, I didn't send it to you via email. Let me quickly chat it to you or get it to you somehow or whatever. You know, it's all that whole that thing. You know, just click a link. You're in the meeting. So the downside of that is you just you guess a number or the ID of the meeting. You just join it. So that's one of the things that they updated in the default. By default, when you create a meeting, it's asking you to put a password in. So they're working on fixing these issues, but it's kind of crazy how this intention and you know, all this scrutiny, which I understand, you know, it's like the number one tool out there in business, in schools, as well as personal. I think a lot of people personally have been using it more and more, and you know, it offering a free sort of tier that allows people to do that is great, for sure. But it's
Zoom has definitely become crazy popular lately. Like everybody is talking about it. So it's important to know that Zoom has these problems, and it's important to know what to do in those situations to mitigate them on your end, because a lot of people are going to be using this tool. So, I mean, like, regardless of what other tools we could preach, Zoom is the de facto, like, it's basically like people are saying it like Google now. Like, oh, we'll have a Zoom later, or like Zoom me later tonight, or whatever. We'll have a Zoom meeting on Sunday.
Zoom.
Yeah. Like it's giving new meaning to the phrase Zoomers.
Yes.
So
yeah,
Zoomers aren't only just Gen Z kids now.
Yeah.
But
with the rise of Zoom, though, there's been also a rise of alternatives to Zoom, considering all these security implications, and a lot of have it become more popular because of the overall fact that everybody now has to be sort of online and be present using different tools. And also other companies have expanded their capability to match it or make it easier to join group calls. You mentioned Skype earlier. You would think that Skype would be, you know, on top of this list considering the pandemic, but Skype really didn't have an easy way of creating a group call and then sending a link out for some random people to join. Also with Zoom, you don't need an account. You need an account with Skype, like all of that.
I think with Skype, all of Microsoft's eggs are currently in the basket of Teams at the moment. So I think that Skype isn't getting much attention in terms of becoming an alternative to Zoom.
Yeah.
And also, I don't think it ever was really meant to be an alternative for Zoom.
Yeah, it wasn't designed to be a group chat like that or group video conferencing like that.
It was more for like a phone call replacement.
Yeah, a phone call or just one-to-one chat.
Like
and
small
they've
groups
also
too.
been, small groups, but they've been around a really long time.
We used to use it for gaming back in the day. Like
Yeah.
that was what Discord was for us back in the day.
And so, certainly Skype is a good alternative that you can use. Google has, their Hangouts that you can use on the desktop. Google also has a cross-platform video chatting that you can use on your phone or tablet called Google Duo that actually has gained a lot of popularity. I've been using it for years now, but more and more people are now aware of it because actually I get notifications on my phone every time someone signs up for an account because it sort of looks at your contact list and sees, hey, this person now uses Duo because they created an account. So I've been getting those notifications actually quite frequently but I've been using it because it's cross-platform, makes it easy for no matter what type of phone or tablet you're using, Android or iOS. You can quickly just join a call and it behaves like FaceTime, but you don't have to have a certain type of phone to use it.
Yeah, it's a FaceTime equivalent. It's
FaceTime equivalent, exactly. And you can do group calls now, and I think they're expanding. I think right now the limit's 10, but they're increasing it to 15 people or 20 people. I forget what it was. So they're expanding the feature set of that as well.
I think it's mostly just to compete with FaceTime's recent group call update. Yeah. It's not by any means related to this coronavirus outbreak.
I think FaceTime still has is the king of the number. I think 30 or something. Yeah. 30 people can do a group FaceTime. Which is kind of insane.
Which is, it's crazy. But and also FaceTime, I think, is, in terms of just stability and audio functionality, I think it's probably one of the better ones. But that's just purely because it's exclusively limited to iOS devices. So Apple has control of that full pipeline. So I think that's the only reason why FaceTime is as good as it is. But every FaceTime call that I've had has been like fantastically smooth and crisp. But yeah, there's plenty of alternatives. Like
Facebook just launched one.
Messenger, right?
Messenger, so they've had Messenger for a long time, right? But now they can they launch a desktop app first, so you can download a dedicated Messenger desktop app, and within there you can create a group, and then you can start a video chat within that group. It's built in. And I think a lot of these features were sort of like worked on being like internally, and now because of all of this have been sort of the development on them. It might have been like a side project that a couple of developers might have been working on because, these companies can't roll out these features this quickly as they did. So there has to be something in the background that's already kind of being worked on or developed or just playing around with it. Yeah. So it's being now sort of accelerated and released quickly. But one that I wanted to talk about that semi has raised in popularity and more and more people, at least within a certain community, have been talking about is Jitsi. And one of the main reasons that...
the weirdest name.
the Jitsi. One of the main reasons is that it's fully open source. And whenever you have these security concerns, open source is quite important because that allows anyone to look at the code and actually analyze it to make sure it actually is open source.
So real quick though, I want to stop at that moment because this is a good like learning opportunity because I feel like you and me, we understand the phrase open source and why it is ubiquitous with security. But like, can you just give a brief explain it like I'm five kind of explanation as to why open source means that it's safer than something that's closed source, because that's something that like a lot of people are like, if everybody can look at the code, then everybody has the ability to decrypt stuff and
to hack it. You know exactly how it works, so you know where to find the holes and stuff. That's a good point. So for most commercial software out there, it's closed source. So what that means is some or a group of developers are working on creating a program, writing the code that actually makes it work. But no one outside of that company is allowed to see exactly how they achieved a certain feature. In programming, when you write a feature, there's a million ways of getting to the same result when you write a piece of code. It all depends on how you go about in the background to actually write it, making sure you're following the right security practices. You're not cutting corners in certain areas where it's not meant to be. So when it's a closed source software like this, no one is allowed to sort of analyze and somewhat scrutinize the way that you went about creating a particular feature. What open source allows you to do is have third parties who aren't part of the development look at that the way you program a certain feature or the certain program, and actually look at to make sure you're practicing all the best practices known out there. There aren't any gaping security holes, and actually run it locally and see how it behaves and follow the path and to ensure that nothing was put in there hidden or secret feature that sends that data to Chinese servers or whatever it may be that you secretly hid in there. Because if you don't have access to that code, a program could potentially be doing that without your knowledge, right? Because most people, you can't see what it's doing. You see the end result, but you don't know actually how it got there, what things it goes through. So
you're going off the fact that their documentation was written in good faith.
Right. True. Yeah. So that's why if they have documentation. So that's why open source is important. So it allows people who know, it doesn't necessarily have to be you that's looking at this, but people who know actually how to do this and do this on a regular basis to actually look at this information in detail and get an idea on actually how it works and a detailed idea of how it works. So Jitsi has sort of popped up as an open source alternative to all of these group video chat conferences, and Jitsi has their own portal that you can just log into, and you put in a random name and you can start a meeting, and you can send that meeting out to your friends and you can all join. But another part of that is you do your own or DIY version of Jitsi, right? They have all the code that you need to create your own server that you run on your own hardware, so you don't have to talk to Jitsi or anything like that. So if you have the know-how and have the hardware to actually get the server up and running, you can create your very own group video channel. I think the limit is 50 people that you can do with no cost to anything, right? If you know the know-how, you can just set it up and run it on a local server. And actually, this call right now is being run on a Jitsi server running on my own hardware that's right down here, right next to me.
Yep.
In a server that I've set up. So it's quite useful. And, I don't have to rely on any other outside connection, outside service. It's all running locally. All I need is an internet connection. Anyone can go ahead and join my call.
Move over, Apple. Bearded Tech now has its own software pipeline.
Yes. So that's one of the main, in terms of the sort of people that I follow on the internet, I've been sort of early because we were talking as like fairly early on.
We're talking about Jitsi over a month ago.
Yeah, over a month ago, and now as the time went on, more and more people are learning about it and actually figuring out how to install it locally. Right, I've seen all these video tutorials come out on how to make it as easy as possible to install it on your own server. Weeks after I've done it.
Yeah,
maybe we should have created that tutorial early on. It makes you think, but we were sort of ahead of the curve there.
We're the hipsters of video chat. We were on Jitsi before it was cool.
Yes, yeah, before it was popular.
Yeah.
But it's been a great alternative. And of course, Jitsi is owned by several companies. I think it was bought by Atlassian, which is a pretty huge company at some point, but it was also then sold by Atlassian. And it's currently owned by a company called 8x8, and they use the same technology that Jitsi does to run their own commercial side of a video conferencing system. So you can, as a company, you buy that service from them, and it runs sort of the Jitsi code as the back end. But it's important to know where this actually comes from, because some of these open source projects are either run by corporations or run someone in their basement or whatever, working on it as a weekend project. So this isn't that, but this is actually a real company behind it. But you know, they're fully maintaining this project and actively updating it, which is important to know actually where it comes from.
It's a fully fledged software.
Yeah, suite. which I wanted to trace back, and I think we had this text conversations, you and I, of like me actually tracing back the ownership, like who actually owns this, when I randomly ran across the internet of Jitsi, because I wanted to know, right? You want to know who is coming from it, open source or not, right? You want to make sure who's actually creating this piece of software.
Also, another benefit of open source software, trying to figure out who owns it is very easy.
Yes.
Instead of being like, oh, this one company owns it, but this company is actually a shell company of this other company. Yeah. But if it's open source, everybody knows where it came from. So you're able to identify the man in his basement running this off of his home server, or you're able to identify the company who has exchanged hands several times and now owns this like whole suite of software. So that's another reason why open source is important. Peer review and accountability. But yeah, no, Jitsi's great. It's a great chat tool. We used to use Hangouts for the majority of our podcast. I think for literally 92 episodes we've used.
Almost, yeah. I think what some
or 91.
We've done, I think, Skype for a little bit too, but Skype and Hangouts has been the main point or way that we've been recording this show.
And I think that Jitsi's going to replace that for us. Also, not only because it's just a nice. We have the whole suite of software, like nobody else owns it. It's running through your server. It's all we're the only ones capturing this. But secondly, because I think it sounds better than most of the other like Hangouts and Skype, and like other ones do a lot of audio compressing. Yeah. And I've noticed that this one does it in a graceful way for voice chat. Like it's not overbearing like Skype or Hangouts is. But it's actually like this audio that I'm like, you sound great coming through this Jitsi broadcast, whereas like on Hangouts everybody kind of sounded like okay, but like when you listen to the local audio of somebody, it was like 1,000 times better, because we all have these like nice microphones because we podcast, and it's nice to actually be able to like hear the benefits of that when you listen to the recording. It's like, oh cool, I spent all this money on this microphone. It's nice to know that I'm getting my money's worth out of what I sound like. yeah So but yeah, it's nice. I'm a huge fan of Jitsi, and I even, with a little bit more difficulty than you did, spun up my own server, so I have one too now. And we had a call going the other day with some friends of mine, and we had up to like 14 concurrent connections on it, and it was great. Like it was fine. Like there were some other issues, like my friends were, I'm going to refer to them as client issues, like client side issues. Nothing wrong with the server itself, but some people couldn't get connections for whatever reason because their laptops were old, or they wanted to block some like WebRTC or whatever to prevent IP leaks and stuff like that. But I mean, it sounds great, but I'm a huge fan of this tool. It's nice. I'm going to use it for video chats basically in perpetuity, I think, at this point. Like, I don't need Hangouts anymore. I think we're officially closing the book on Hangouts.
Yeah, I think
now you just need to spin up a Google Docs alternative, and then we can own everything.
Yeah. Actually, I'm working on that. Actually, I've been working on figuring out a way to do a Google Drive alternative. So the way we organize our podcast files, running on my own NAS. Actually, I've been syncing the files that we create over to my NAS automatically.
Oh, really?
Actually, yeah. So I've been doing that. So yeah, we could talk about that later. But yeah, to sort of get off of these tools.
I want to talk about servers one time. Just do a special episode on servers and just talk about like our favorite tools. Just really nerd out for like an hour, just talking about it. Yeah. But yeah, no, I'm a huge fan of Zoom. It's great, and I think this is like keeping it as high level as we can for this. It's like it's an amazing alternative, and anybody who's really, I think you can even have calls just from Jitsi's website, right?
Yeah. So that's
Like
what I
you don't
mentioned
even need
earlier.
a server.
Yeah,
You can
you
just
don't need to. So they run their um, um, own thing. So you can just go to jit.si. I think.
I think it's jit.si.
No, it's not. It's meet.jit. Yeah, it's meet.jit.si.
Okay.
And you don't need to run your own server, right? Again, you can just you can put in a random conference code name, and that you can share a link with your friends. So you don't need to run your own server, but if you can just run it on their own instance that they have. But you can have the confidence that it's still running the same exact code if you were running it locally in your own server. So there's nothing sort of hidden that's being used to track. You don't have to have an account. You don't have to put your name. You just get a link. You send this to your friends. They click a link. You can just join a conference call quickly and easily.
Yeah.
So yeah, we'll put that link to the show notes if you wanted to use that as an alternative with your friends. And it's certainly easy to use. There's apps on your phone that you can get as well as your tablet, and it works in Chrome the best, but web browsers as well.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, there are a couple alternatives out there, and we'll have a list of those as well in the show notes that we'll provide of alternatives to Zoom.
Definitely.
If you wanted to get together with some friends and still concerned about the security, or just wanted to try some other services out there, because there's plenty to choose from, and they all have their ups and downs and different features. So
is it too much effort to rank them?
To rank them from what we prefer as
to what we would say, like,
this is Beards of Tech recommended.
Yeah. Now I want to like have it be in like a meaningful order, so that way like, people who have the time people who are listening to this who want to know which one of these do we have the most faith in and which ones do we have the least faith in. I can immediately tell you right now, I think I know which one is the one we have the least faith in. Facebook Messenger. But the one that and Jitsi being obviously I think our number one, but I think it would be important for people to see this kind of list organized in a way where they can know where, like, it's like if they're not concerned about security and they just want to talk to somebody, what can they use? Or if they want to be concerned about security while having this, then which one do we recommend? I think that's important. But yeah, we can do that after this recording is done, and then get that list ready. But
sure.
Yeah. I kind of want to talk about something completely unrelated, but it's just because you and I are the same person. I feel like we can get a meaningful conversation out of this. But it's weird because normally around this time of the year, we'd be talking about new devices that are coming out and all that stuff. But I want to talk a little bit about the significance of the iPhone SE 2020.
Yeah.
And why I think that phone is going to be Apple's best-selling phone for probably multiple years to come. Even though the fact that it's missing a lot of features that a lot of people would consider ubiquitous with modern smartphones. Like, for example, it's got Touch ID again. It looks like an iPhone 8. It's basically part for part.
Pretty much is, yeah.
Yeah, minus the A13 Bionic chip in there. But I think it's going to be more important than like any other phone, aside from maybe the Pixel 4a. I think it's the A line. Is there budget line?
3A. Yeah. The 4A is rumored. It's not out yet, but they have the 3A out now.
Yeah. And the 3A is a great phone. And I think that these companies, Google, Samsung, Apple, are all going to kind of find a nice profit margin in their budget line of phones, especially now during this time, because people don't want to spend money. But
or don't have the money to spend.
Yeah, and they just need something, because I believe this iPhone is probably cheap enough to be offered on like the free tier for most carriers as like a new phone.
Yeah, I haven't ever actually looked if what carriers are offering in terms of incentives. It'd be good to see because I'm sure there are plenty, especially if you trade in like even a older phone. Like the trade-in value might even cover half the cost of the phone.
The trade-in value of an iPhone 10, if you were to have a very like high quality, like uncracked, like working iPhone 10, is 75% of the cost of the base model of the SE. So it's like you could get it for pennies on the dollar essentially for trading in a newer smartphone. I don't know why you would downgrade, but it's something that is something to consider if you need a phone. Yeah. So it's cheap. But yeah, so Apple, for anybody who's not aware, they released the new iPhone SE. It's not called the SE2. It's just the SE 2020 edition.
2020 version.
Yeah. There's no other. It's just they're just calling it the SE. There's no name for it. And not to be confused with the previous model of SE with the 4.1 inch screen. This one has a 4.7 inch screen.
I think it was smaller than that, 3.5. I think
maybe
3.5 inch because it had the old iPhone.
It was shaped like the 4.
Yeah, or the 5S is the exact model that it was based off, but they're all the same sort of form factor. That square, boxy look,
small. Yeah, very very
small.
Compact. Fits like in the palm of my hand and not just like is the same size as the palm of my hand. But it's something that is not that. It's an important distinction because a lot of people hear the iPhone SE coming out and they're like, "Ooh, got to get the new small iPhone." I'm really happy that Apple's keeping that small phone size when no, it's not. It's the same size, basically a spitting image of the iPhone 8. So anybody who's familiar with the iPhone 6, the 6S, the 7, the 8, all of them, it is that phone. That exact shape, that exact size, that exact bezel, everything. All the way down to the Touch ID still being there and the lack of a headphone jack. The important differences, though, is that this phone, visually, the only hallmarks that you can distinguish between this phone and a base model iPhone 8 is that if you buy the white phone, you are not going to get a white front plate. The front face of the phone is all black on all 3 models of this iPhone. And they moved the Apple logo from the top middle to the center of the back of the phone. So it's lower to match up with the new iPhone 11 and the 10. Does the 10s have the lowered Apple logo?
10s. There wasn't a 10s. Oh, 10s. Oh, 10s Max. Yeah.
The tennis match. Does that phone have the lowered Apple logo on the back of it?
No, it does. No, it's still up
so
at the top.
The 11 was the first.
Yeah, 11 is the first. Yeah.
Okay, so those are the 2 visual differences, and then under the hood, I think literally the only difference is the A13 Bionic chip. So it's got the same chip that's running in actually the iPhone 11 Pro.
Yeah.
So it is a much more powerful phone.
It's been quite surprising. So the benchmarks have been starting to come out, and the benchmarks for this SE model are beating some high-end Android smartphones that are up in the $800 to plus $1,000 range of price.
It's beating the Galaxy S20.
It's crazy.
Yeah, it's it's scoring higher in its CPU. Well, then again, Apple's always kind of wiped the floor with Android devices.
Yeah,
in terms of CPU power,
their CPUs are killer in terms of performance, and they've had a leg up on Qualcomm for a long time because these most Android phones are running are Qualcomm chipsets. But
that being said, like Android phones can make up for it with having extra RAM and other features that mitigate that. But Apple definitely creams it in terms of CPU. I think the newer iPhones are actually beating old MacBooks now.
Yeah. I mean, certainly the iPad has been beating MacBooks for a while in terms of performance, but it's crazy that they can stuff that chip into a price so small, like a phone so cheap.
Yeah.
And it really gets you a lot of value. One thing to note with that as well is how good Apple is with updates.
Yeah.
So when you get a phone like the SE, you can guarantee at least 4, maybe 5 years of usage out of it, and you'll still get the latest, greatest features as well as security updates along with that. So you won't have a phone that you're stuck with that'll be outdated within 2 years just because you're paying a smaller price of the phone, because this is the latest A13 processor. So if it's running, because they have to maintain the newest software for the latest 11 Pro phone, they're going to do it for the SE because it's running the same chip. So why wouldn't they do that? So I think you're going to have the support out there. Because a lot of these cheap Android phones from these no-name brands or smaller brands that throw out these small, cheap Android devices, the support and the OS side, they might just, move on to a couple models, 2 models
It's very
down
variable.
the line. They might not, update.
There's no consistency across the different
definitely no
manufacturers.
consistency.
Yeah. And the nice thing about having this phone be where it is with Apple is that you get all the benefits of having the A13 Bionic in a very familiar form factor. You don't have to worry about Face ID. Face ID is actually becoming a problem in coronavirus because everybody's wearing face masks.
It doesn't work.
I'm finding if I'm like one-handed trying to like get gas for my car and I have my glove on my one hand and my mask on, like I have to use my free hand to unlock my phone by entering the passcode in. So it's like it actually is a benefit now to have Touch ID back.
Yeah.
And a lot of people are probably wondering, like, why did they still leave out the headphone jack? Why are they not upgrading these things? Why does it have the old shape? And I don't understand. And I think the reason kind of goes back to what I was saying earlier when I was saying anybody who's familiar with the 6, familiar with the 6S, familiar with the 7, familiar with the 8, they've been working on this design for a long, long time, probably close to 7 years now, I think was when the 6 came out. And it's something that Apple has streamlined to a T. Like their manufacturing lines, it's very easy for them to pump out frames that are shaped like that. It's very easy for them to pump out those cameras. It's very easy for them to get Touch ID ready to go. It's very easy for every piece
easy
of
and
that
cheap.
phone. And cheap, yeah. And that's one of the benefits of working on a manufacturing process for more than half of a decade is you can get it pretty good. Like you can make it very efficient. So
you already have the reason it's the same shape because you already have the same machines that pump out the iPhone 8. You just have to adjust small little things here and there, and then you can just continue to pump out more of these cases. And just...
The iPhone 8 has been in the market for several years now. So there's been several iterations of manufacturing because there's people who still have iPhone 8s who need replacement parts. There's people who go in for repairs or need replacements.
And it's been actively sold. I think they stopped after they released the 8, but you could still buy an iPhone 8 on Apple's website up until they released the iPhone SE.
Yeah.
It was cheaper, actually more expensive than the SE. So the SE is even less expensive than the old iPhone 8 was that you could buy a week prior to the SE launch with the old processor still, which is kind of funny. But now that's even cheaper because it was $599, I think it was, or $499 for the base. But
and
now,
a lot of and a lot of people might also be wondering, well, okay, cool, it's got this new CPU, and I understand I'm going to get software updates, but as you and I have obviously discovered just from conversations with other people and from even talking to people on this podcast, security features aren't exactly the sexiest thing that comes with a new smartphone. And it's not exactly the most immediate thing that you would notice for sure, because you're not going to know that until 4 or 5 years down the line, assuming you still have this phone. But the important thing that is immediate with this is that unlike the iPhone 8, with the benefit of having an A13 Bionic in a phone that's literally the same size and same specs as the iPhone 8, you're going to have far better battery efficiency because that's several years of CPU enhancements. And the easiest way to make things more efficient is not necessarily better battery technology, but better computational technology. A more efficient computer chip is going to be way better on battery life than simply just throwing more milliamp hours at it, or a larger battery, or making the phone fatter. So it's something that is going to be very apparent for people who are upgrading from an iPhone 8, but not necessarily apparent for people who are coming from the 10 or the 11, because they have the larger battery sizes to accommodate those bigger screens. But since this is just simply swapping the CPU on an iPhone 8, then this is going to be, you're going to notice, you're going to get probably a couple hours more battery life out of this phone than you were before.
Even though it's the same exact battery size as the iPhone 8, which a lot of people were complaining about, but really iOS sips battery, especially in standby. You can leave a phone if you don't touch it for days, and it will maybe move a couple percentage points.
Yeah.
It's kind of crazy in terms of the standby time, but
their CPU is insane.
Very, very power efficient.
Yeah. And I find it, like, I never thought, so this is going to be something I never thought in the entire 3-year history of this podcast that I would ever have said. But it is shocking to me when a new iPhone comes out that's cheaper than a OnePlus phone.
Yeah. And now OnePlus is actually moving up in price because they released the 8 Pro, the OnePlus 8 Pro, which starts at $899, I think.
They're no longer the flagship killer. They are the flagship.
They are the flagship.
The SE is the flagship killer. And
and
then for Android, the Pixel 4a is going to be the flagship killer.
With that camera, that's huge.
If you get the Pixel 4 camera, especially now that they've had a year to learn about the gripes of the 4, usually the weird thing is that since they released the mainline Pixel, when the A model comes out, not only is it a budget edition, and it does sacrifice a few features, sure, like maybe screen resolution and stuff like that, but it's also, they've learned from some mistakes. So I think the 3A actually had more RAM than the 3 did. So like things like that they can learn from. So those phones are actually becoming the phones to keep an eye out for. And a lot of people are also quickly learning that they don't necessarily need the $1,200 iPhone 11 Pro Max, or they don't need the latest and greatest phone, and they can get away just fine with having the base model iPhone or the budget edition now.
Yeah.
So and same goes for Android. Like I think we've officially, like, I keep saying this every year, but I think we've hit peak phone.
Yes.
Like it's something where now that the high end is so saturated with like amazing technology, and you have like cutting edge features like sub-screen fingerprint scanners and like Face ID and like advanced recognition tools, and some cameras that are rivaling DSLR and mirrorless lenses at this point, then like I think now you're starting to see that innovation shift towards the lower end of phones. And now that all this technology is becoming streamlined, you're starting to see some features trickle down into these lower end budget phones, which is fantastic for the consumer, because people can now get 90% of the way there with features. And I don't think Apple's confirmed either way which camera it has, if it's the exact camera lens from the 8 or if it's the primary shooter from the 11. But I think that regardless, just because of that CPU power, you're now able to get those features like the real-time depth sensing and the real-time like lighting effects and things like that.
Yeah,
you can't get
advanced HDR mode and things like that get higher dynamic range. The video features are still top notch of any phone. That shooting is 4K clear video that's well stabilized, and it just gets you a good shot at it all the time.
The iPhone SE wipes the floor with every phone ever made at that price point, and even cameras at that price point. The iPhone SE is hands down the video king when it comes to budget smartphones. It kills every other phone. It's ridiculous. It's like not even fair.
Yeah, it's really isn't. And you know, people always highlight these specs of like, oh, it only has this much amount of RAM, or you know, has this really small battery. But you know, phones aren't all about specs. You can't lay out a side-by-side table and put two specs up on a screen and really be able to compare a phone. You have to compare it by actually using it. And iOS never needed that much RAM. Android can use 8 gigabytes of RAM. iPhone doesn't. It's useless to it because it's been built from the very beginning to be efficient. And yes, it only has whatever 2.5, whatever 3 gigs of RAM. It can fly with that.
Yeah.
And Android is just not as efficient. Yes, it can, you compare the specs side by side. You might think that the Android phone will be better just because it has more RAM or a bigger battery, but that might not correlate or translate to an actual experience that you might imagine by just looking at the specs. So I think people have to look at it a little bit further, a little bit deeper, and why the hype is so big in certain people. That have done the reviews of what makes this such a big deal that certain people have highlighted, like us now, why we think it's such a big deal. Because if you just look at the specs, you might think it's like this, whatever. It's just another cheap phone. You're not gonna, but it really isn't. It's really is a game changer, and they're gonna sell a ton of these. And there's been a whole group of people who have been holding out on actually upgrading to the Face ID type of phones, or they're not willing to pay, even if they have the money, they're not willing to pay $1,000 plus a phone. They don't need that, and they've been holding out.
Fun fact: you can actually buy a base model iPhone SE, a pair of AirPods, and an Apple Watch for less than the cost of an 11 Pro Max. So
kind of ridiculous.
Yeah. Like, you can buy all of that, and you're spending only like $900 at that point, instead of the $1,099 required to buy an 11 Pro Max. So it's something that's definitely worth keeping an eye on for anybody looking for the budget.
I'm curious to see what this will do to the budget Android market. Yeah. What sort of kick in the pants will this put behind and like trying to compete with that price range and really trying to bring up those features.
Because that was what Android's been banking on for years, is that Apple never really dabbled into the low end, so they've never really had to compete there. But now that Apple's going to start eating their lunch in the low end, that Android's going to, like, there's some Android manufacturers that I don't think are going to survive that, because they basically were cornering the market of people who just want a cheap phone. But now those people who just want a cheap phone can make that an iPhone. And
although, if you're a true diehard Android fan of
you're gonna
cheap
have
phones, you're gonna keep going on Android no matter what. You're not this might not make you switch to iPhone. Some people will just never use an Apple product just because of whatever preconceived notions they might have in their head about the company. But
but those people stay mostly at the high end. Those people don't.
It's true.
Float down to the low end. The people who are on the low end just want a phone.
They just default to whatever the cheapest phone is, and that
whatever
happens
their plan
to be
gives them.
Whatever that happens to be an Android most of the time, right?
Yeah.
And now they might see an iPhone now part of that potential list of like, here's my budget. What phones can you offer me?
Yeah.
And now an iPhone can be part of that list and part of the consideration.
Because people are like, oh, I could get the Poco phone, but it's like, oh, if I spend like $100 more, I get an iPhone. That's pretty cool. Something like that.
Most 99.9% of the world's like, what the hell is a Poco phone?
Yeah, exactly.
Who the hell is Poco?
Yeah, people who are on the Android low end were kind of praising that a little bit, but that phone was a budget phone from a couple years ago that like is doing the same thing that OnePlus was doing, where they broke into the U.S. market very recently. So I understand why a lot of people won't know about them, but anybody who's at the low end, like I said, probably doesn't care. There's no low end enthusiasts that I really know of. Besides us.
Yeah.
But no, this is a compelling phone. Like, I would consider, like, if I was coming from a low end Android phone and I saw an iPhone that my plan was offering, and it was like, hey man, just get it for free with your plan, and you pay your 2-year contract, and that's it, I would be like, yep, that's it. I'm picking it up. That's it. So yeah, but that's the point that I wanted to bring up with the SE.
Good, yeah.
It's bigger than the SE name has changed. It's bigger, but it's better.
Yeah,
and it's important. Sure. It's going to be the Apple's most important iPhone, I think, of 2020, and probably 2019, and probably 2021.
Yeah, so. And they're gonna next year they're gonna release a SE Plus. So if you want a bigger phone with a similar price saving,
literally the 8 Plus
thing, but it'll be the 8 Plus, pretty much.
Yeah, probably for like $100 more.
Yeah, potentially. I'm curious to see how they price that. But yeah, it's exciting time for cheap phones. But I think this was a good first episode back after our hiatus.
I think so. I'm nodding my head. Yes.
We sort of jumped right back into it, and without missing a beat. I think it comes fairly naturally for us to talk about this stuff.
Yeah, and there's been some people asking me where the podcast went, and now I can finally tell them that we're back. But I do want to try to like actually make this a routine and and like do this like no matter who's available, no matter who we can get, no matter
we have to figure out. It depends. As long as we can get 2 people at least on the call, we have plenty of others.
I even made it do with one person.
Yeah, we can certainly do just one-off. One person, but yeah, I want to make this get back into the swing of things.
Yeah,
for sure.
Yeah, and then we can hopefully slowly roll into the features that we're all excited about at the beginning of this year or the end of last year. But yeah, I think this could be the start of something good. Yeah, but I guess that brings us to the end of the episode.
Yes.
So. If you're listening for the first time, because now we're popping up in your feeds again with a new episode, welcome. If you are a friend who maybe has shared this episode, we thank you. And I just wanted to let you guys know that we are available everywhere. You can go to beardsoftech.com to find more information about us and all of the members on this podcast. You can go to Spotify, Google Play, anywhere that... Apple, anywhere that you can find good podcasts, we're available. And you can also go to beardsoftech.com/reviews in order to leave us a review. I believe that links straight to the iTunes page. So, and then you can go to beardsoftech.com/subscribe. I believe we have set up also with our links. So, either way, you can find us. If you're listening to us, welcome. We're back. And this has been episode 92. And we will see you guys in the next one.